Hiya, welcome to the video. So today we're going to be doing, hopefully, the prompt for Folktales week, which is C. Now, I found the story of The Honest Penny, which is from Norway, and I found it in my storybook. So I've already got a story. I'd kind of already planned out some ideas of what I wanted from the image. So I did some little thumbnails of a cat on a ship's mast. So I tried some yesterday. This guy, obviously not finished, it's like halfway through. I filmed the time lapse up to the point where I thought, this isn't going the way I wanted. And rather than getting angry, I just took it off and started again. Decided to go against the ship's mast and did a cat catching lots of mice and rats. But again, the composition didn't work very well for me. This thing was too big. I don't think it really needed to be there. And also the cat's proportions weren't really right. I didn't feel happy with it. So rather than getting stressed with it yesterday and trying to push through, I just stopped and we'll tackle it today. It's fine. Like I said about the Folktale week, I'm going to hold it lightly. I'm not going to... I mean, it's easy to say not to get stressed out, but I mean, sometimes that does happen. When I do feel myself getting stressed out, I'm just going to have a talk to myself, make myself realise that it's not something mega important. I'm not going to lose my job, like I said in one of the previous videos. It's just a bit of fun, and if it's not fun, then it's not working. So let's get my desk set up. I've got an idea of what I want. I want the cat to be a bit more like this style, so I'm going to put that there so I can keep referring to it. Hang on, I'll find a way of setting it up. And let's just go, and whatever happens, happens, and I'll post that up. It'll be fine. Okay, here's a little tip. If you're working on a piece and you find you're getting a bit too close to it, or even if you don't think you're getting a bit too close for it, step away from it. Go and make yourself a cup of tea, which is what I'm going to go and do now, and when you come back, you see it with fresh eyes. So all those bits that you thought might have been overworked or underworked or you didn't quite like, you might come back and think, actually, yeah, they work. Or those bits that you thought, oh, yeah, they're amazing. When you come back with fresh eyes, you might think, oh, that might need just a bit of tweaking. So with that in mind, let's go and make a cuppa. So while I'm here, having a tiny little break, I thought I'd answer one of the questions that someone's asked me in the comments, and it's a really nice one, so I thought you might like to know the answer, because I'm sure a lot of you feel this as well. So Helen asked, do you ever struggle with either underworking or overworking a piece? Because I always tend to underwork something. Yeah, it's taken me, well, a long time. I still struggle with it now. Since this year out that I've taken, I've got a lot better at knowing what to do if I've underworked something or when I've overworked it. Firstly, this year out and putting a volume of like judgment-free sketchbook work, if that makes sense. So putting a bunch of judgment-free sketchbook work out has made me kinder to myself when I've been overworking it and given me more resources to know what to do when I've underworked something. So one thing I like to do now, so which was it, 2 Folktale week prompts away, the one in the forest, Lost, the first one that we did, that felt a little bit underworked before I added pastel to make a kind of murky background. And I've started adding this pastel kind of overtone to make a picture deeper, only really since this year out, because I've been playing a lot more with other materials. So I've got a big like A3 sketchbook that I just play with. I do good cheap illustration, art clubs in there. So you can do the art clubs on Instagram Lives. They've got a load recorded on there. So go and check those out if you want to experiment with new materials and things and have a play. And that's kind of like my kind of the place where I don't do any observational sketching like out and about, but it's where I try and draw things like maybe from photographs or from like ornaments in my house, and I play with materials and like overlay things and blob paint around in a kind of judgment-free zone. And since I've started doing that this year, that's where I discovered the pastel is a really good way to add, I don't know, finishing touches to certain things, because it gives like a really nice texture and a depth. I mean, that might not be something that you want to explore. That might not be your way of making a picture more kind of finished, but I found that incorporating pastels, albeit very lightly, into a finished illustration, especially over like watercolours and washes, that's something that I've really enjoyed. I did it in the Folktale week prompt Lost. I didn't do it in the ink one because I was just using ink, but I don't know, that's something that I've experienced. But yeah, I still have trouble under and overworking something. So the the pictures that I tried to do yesterday to try and get ahead for today's prompt, they were very underworked. And I know I stopped before I got to the end point, so they were going to be underworked. But yeah, it's something I still struggle with. But I think the thing that I'm better with now is being kinder to myself when something doesn't work out. So rather than stopping and it eating me up inside, I just see it for what it is. I hold it lightly. I go, oh, well, that hasn't really worked. Maybe like try and answer a few questions about it. Like, what is it that you don't like? What is it that hasn't really worked? What parts of it have worked? And then, I mean, it doesn't always work, but I try and not get stressed out when something doesn't work, or not stressed out for too long. So yesterday when I was doing those 2 of the drawings that didn't work out the way I wanted, I had lots of other stuff going on, so I had to tidy my studio. I've got those baubles that I need to finish. I've got some other bits and bobs associated with YouTube that I had in my mind. And it was like a perfect storm of like things that needed doing that were just taking away from my time to kind of sit down and do some drawing. So that did stress me out a little bit, but not for as long as it would have done previously. like I'm trying to remind myself a bit more about, like, you know, it's okay to make mistakes, and if you never make mistakes, you never get if you never get over making mistakes, you never get onto the good stuff. So it's like what I say about pancakes. If you've never seen me before, if you've never heard me say this before, I'll say it for you. If you have heard me say this before, just bear with me, because I know you've heard this a lot. But I see sketching and drawing and making art as like when you make pancakes. And if you've ever made pancakes, you'll know that your first few pancakes never, ever, I mean, unless you're really lucky, turn out like pancakes. They always turn out like things that don't flip in the pan. They're a little bit raw, they're a little bit misshapen. And that's because you're learning about your mixture, you're learning about the pan temperature, so you're testing to see if the pan's the right temperature, you're testing to see if your mixture's watery enough or thick enough. And if you stopped after those couple of pancakes and went, I'll throw this mix in the bin, I'm never going to make pancakes again, your only experience of pancakes is those 2 or 3 first pancakes that you ever make, which are always misshapen. And it's the same with art. You've got to, if you stop whenever you make a mistake, or if you stop when something isn't going right, you will always be in that first pancake zone. You'll never get past it, you'll never learn from it. So if you see making mistakes as a way of getting to those delicious pancakes and you see it for what it is, you move past it, it's part of the process. Oh well, move on to the next one. Maybe the next one's going to be an edible pancake. That's the key to success, really. So if you're still struggling with like overworking or underworking a piece, just try and be kind to yourself and hold it lightly, and maybe just try some things on the piece that hasn't worked. Maybe section it off and like try and add like pastels to one section, or like going over with pens or inks, or I don't know. Just experiment and see what works. I mean, you'll find your own way of working up your pieces to being how you want them to. Just because I do it one way doesn't mean that you've got to do it that way. There's no right way or wrong way of doing art and creating. But yeah, I do still struggle with overworking and underworking. Yesterday's folktale prompt, the very first time I did that, the first picture that I did, it was just too dark. The tones were all wrong. But I just started again. It was fine. It was a learning experience, and I then realised that I had to watch my tones, and I went in with much lighter layers of ink. So it was a learning experience for me. But yeah, I think it's pretty normal. A lot of people do still struggle with that. And I think the people who are successful in art are the ones that don't let that be a defining point in their creative process. So they don't let those times when it doesn't work define them. They just go, oh well, and on to the next one. That's what I'm hoping anyway. Also, a little tip, which is something I found when I was doing the 3 materials drawing challenge on Instagram like a couple of months ago. If you're looking at a piece of finished art and you don't know, like something doesn't work with it, but you just don't know what it is, take a photograph of it, or get your phone camera, play with the settings and take it down to like a monochrome, or desaturate it so it's all black and white. And that's a really good way of finding if the tones in your piece work. So when you desaturate it and you turn it to black and white, it is only tone. And if a piece doesn't work, you might find that in colour, it looks like, because they're all different colours, all the bits of your work are different colours, you might think, well, there's no reason for this not to work. What isn't making this sing for me? But if you change it to black and white, you might find that there are no darks and no lights, and they're all like a middle tone, and that's what isn't working. You might need to be adding darker colours and lighter colours. You might need to have more contrast between light and dark. And when you're just looking at something in colour rather than in black and white or monotone, you can't always see when a tone when all the images, when all the colours in your piece are the same tone. So that's a really nice little tip. When I was doing the 3 materials drawing challenge, so you had 3 materials. So I chose my materials that I wanted to use, and then I used my camera on a desaturated mode, and I looked through my camera at all of the materials that I wanted to use. Sometimes I'd swatch them down, and I would always choose a dark tone, a mid-tone and a light tone to make my image for the 3 materials drawing challenge. And those ones that I did that for were always the most successful. And right at the beginning, before I started doing that, I would do some pieces and they'd always look underworked. They'd always look like a little bit bland, a little bit like, oh, I need something else. And those pictures, when I went back to them and I did the black and white thing over them, and I could see them through my camera on my phone, and they were all desaturated, they were the ones that were all monotone. So if you're finding that you're regularly underworking your pieces, that might be a good way to kind of investigate that further. So get your phone camera on, go to your photo settings, try and find the desaturated mode or the black and white mode, and just look at your artwork through the camera in the desaturated mode. And if all of the tones are very similar, if there are no dark areas, no light areas, that might be why it's feeling underworked. So that might kind of spark action from you as to like how to rework something or work it a little bit more, if that makes sense. It might not work, but I mean, that's a nice little tip to take away, and something that I learnt during the 3 materials drawing challenge. I don't know who told me that. It was someone on Instagram. But it's a really good tip, and I use it a lot now to find materials that have got the right tones in them. A merchant had to make a journey into foreign lands, so he asked all of his servants what he should buy and bring home for each of them. The scullion held out his penny. "Well, what shall I buy with this?" said the merchant. "Buy what I can get for it. It is honest, that I know," said the lad. So when the merchant had unladen his ship and laden her again in foreign lands, an old wife came walking by with a bag at her back. "What have you got in the bag?" asked the merchant. "Nothing other than a cat. I can't afford to feed it any longer, so I thought I would throw it into the sea and make away with it." So he asked the old wife if she would take 4 farthings for it, and the bargain was soon struck. Now when the merchant had sailed for a bit, fearful weather fell on him. At last he came to a land on which he had never set foot before, so he went up into the town. At the inn, the board was laid with a rod for each man, and as soon as the meat was set on the board, out swarmed mice in thousands, and each had to take his rod and flog and flap about him. "Hard work to dine in this land," said the merchant, "but don't folk keep cats here?" So the merchant fetched the cat he had bought. They begged the merchant to sell them the cat, and at last he promised to let them have it for $100. And so the merchant set off again, but he had scarce got good sea room before he saw the cat sitting up the main masthead. I'm so pleased with the way this turned out. I finished it off with pastel, grey pastel, and also a blue pastel, one of the chunky Jackson's ones that I got. And I didn't think I was going to do that because it wasn't like a nighttime scene and it wasn't like in an enclosed forest type scene, but it feels a bit more stormy, and in the folktale there are storms like on the horizon, and it feels a bit dusky. And what I like about what it's done here, because I added it on afterwards, I went around the cat and around the pile of mice, and it kind of just puts a little kind of glow around them, so it draws the eye to them. I quite like it. I also like that I've added the gory blood like around his chops and on the pile of mice. This cat, if you don't know, is basically my cat. And while he's an indoor cat, he is a bit of a murderer. He doesn't bring in mice and things, obviously, because he doesn't go outside and we don't have mice in the house, but he'll happily bat woodlice and spiders. You've really got to watch him. So it felt right that he was the cat in question. And folktales are a bit like, they're a bit gory. If you've ever read any of the grim ones, they're all a little bit dark and yeah, a bit gory. So I thought that was a nice touch. But I am super chuffed with that. I can't tell you how chuffed I am. Especially when you compare it to the other two, which I know they're not finished, but they've got a different feel to them. They feel a lot more basic, which, you know, is fine. But I don't feel like I approached it with the mindset that I approached this one. It just feels a lot more consistent as well with the other folktale drawings that I've done for Folktale Week. I'm actually going to scan that and put it on my portfolio, as I'm going to do with all of my Folktale Week ones, because it's the first time really that I've done some finished illustrations for text that isn't text that I've created myself, so for someone else's story. And I really like the results. Also, what adding the pastel did, it knocked this ship into the background, where before it was like the same tone as the cat and the foreground. The pastel just knocked it back into the background and made it a bit more murky and as though it's kind of hidden by mist. And also the thing I was talking about before, the tip about turning your phone onto like a monotone mode or a black and white mode to check the tones of your picture. I did it with this and I'll pop it up on the screen here now so you can see what I mean about the tones. So the main players are dark or more kind of saturated. And there's a contrasting tone between the main features and the background, the things that aren't the main features. But I've had a blast doing this, and I hope you've enjoyed joining me for today's folktale. I'm not going to try and get ahead and do tomorrow's prompt today. I'm just going to wing it tomorrow. In fact, what is tomorrow's prompt? Okay, so tomorrow's prompt is sleep. I haven't done it, so we will be winging that tomorrow. I've got a story in mind, but I'll deal with that in the morning. I'm going to leave this video here now, and until the next one. See ya!